The room fell silent as the doctor approached Catherine with that look, that unmistakable look that changes everything forever. "Mrs. Harris, I'm deeply sorry. We did everything we could, but your husband didn't make it through the surgery. 8 years of mourning a man who chose to disappear. 8 years building a shrine to a ghost who was drinking cocktails on a beach while she slept alone in tear-soaked sheets. It was late February, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there." Catherine remembered every detail of that day, the squeaking of her boots against the hospital's polished floor, the antiseptic smell that would haunt her dreams for years to come, the way the fluorescent lights made everything look sickly and unreal. Dr. Andrew Harris, her husband of 12 years, had gone into the hospital that morning for what should have been a routine shift in the emergency department. By evening, she was being told he had suffered a catastrophic aneurysm while treating a patient and collapsed in trauma room 3. The hospital staff, his colleagues, his friends, had fought desperately to save him. But despite their best efforts, Andrew Harris was gone, or so everyone believed. Catherine and Andrew had met during her final year of nursing school, when she was doing her clinical rotation in the very same hospital where he would later be pronounced dead. She had been immediately drawn to his quiet confidence, the gentle way he spoke to patients, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It wasn't the dramatic love at first sight that romance novels promised, but something steadier, a recognition perhaps of something familiar in a stranger. Their courtship had been quick but not rushed, as though they both sensed they had found what they had been looking for. Within a year they were engaged, and 6 months after that married in a small ceremony by the lake where Andrew had grown up spending summers. They had built what Catherine believed was a beautiful life together, the colonial-style house in the suburbs, with the red front door that Andrew had insisted on painting himself. The garden Catherine tended with almost religious devotion each spring and summer. The discussions about children that had grown more serious in the months before Andrew's death. They had even converted the small bedroom upstairs into what would have been a nursery, though it remained empty, waiting. They had friends they met regularly for dinner, careers they were proud of, plans for the future that stretched years ahead. There had been arguments, of course, periods of distance, but nothing that had ever suggested to Catherine that Andrew was anything but content in the life they shared. In the immediate aftermath of Andrew's death, Catherine moved through her days like a sleepwalker. She took a leave of absence from her job at the pediatric clinic, unable to face the sight of doctors in white coats, the smell of medical facilities, the routine of care that had been so intertwined with her relationship with Andrew. Friends brought casseroles she couldn't eat, sat with her in silence when words failed, helped sort through the practical matters of death that seemed obscene in their bureaucratic coldness. Andrew's parents flew in from Arizona, their grief a mirror that Catherine could barely stand to look into. His sister Emma stayed for 3 weeks, sleeping in the guest room and making sure Catherine didn't disappear entirely into herself. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hushed voices. Catherine had insisted on an open casket, needing to see him one last time to confirm the unbelievable truth that the man she loved was gone. She remembered standing beside the casket, staring down at Andrew's face. It had looked wrong somehow, the mortician's work too perfect, too still. Not Andrew anymore, just a carefully crafted simulacrum of the man she had kissed goodbye that morning. She had reached out to touch his cheek, half expecting it to be warm beneath her fingers. It wasn't, of course. Cold and waxy and final. She kept herself upright through the service, the burial, the reception afterward at their home, that house that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too full of Andrew's absence. And when everyone had finally gone, when she was alone with the leftovers from the reception neatly packed in the refrigerator and the sympathy cards lined up on the mantel, Catherine had collapsed on their bed, still their bed then, not just hers, and wept until exhaustion claimed her. The first year was the hardest, each day a mountain to climb, each night a dark ocean to cross. She moved through the expected stages of grief, though not in any orderly progression, denial giving way to anger, circling back to denial, plunging into depression, occasionally catching glimpses of acceptance before being dragged back into the depths. She joined a support group for widows and widowers, sat in church basements drinking weak coffee from styrofoam cups, listening to stories of loss that echoed her own. She saw a therapist twice a week, then once a week, then every other week as the rawness of her grief gradually dulled to a persistent ache. Slowly, Catherine began to rebuild her life around the hole Andrew had left. She returned to work, finding solace in the simple act of caring for others when she could barely care for herself. She maintained friendships, though some fell away, unable to accommodate the new person grief had made her. She kept the house, though friends and family urged her to sell it, to start fresh somewhere without memories lurking in every corner. She couldn't bear to leave it. Not the garden Andrew had helped her plant, not the bedroom where she could sometimes, in the haze between sleeping and waking, still feel the weight of him beside her. Time passed, as it inevitably does. 2 years, 3, 5. Catherine learned to carry her grief like a stone in her pocket, always there but not always at the forefront of her attention. She went days, sometimes even weeks, without crying. She laughed again, genuinely. She considered briefly dating, though the few attempts she made felt so foreign, so wrong, that she abandoned the effort. Andrew's clothes still hung in the closet, though fewer of them, as she gradually donated pieces to charity. His toothbrush remained in the holder beside the sink, a habit of preservation she couldn't explain even to herself. On the 5th anniversary of Andrew's death, Catherine visited his grave with fresh flowers, lilies, his favorite. She sat on the small bench she had installed beside the headstone and told him about her life, about the changes at the hospital, about his parents who had moved to Florida and sent her Christmas cards each year. She told him she was doing okay, that she missed him every day but was finding her way forward. She didn't know if he could hear her, didn't know if she believed in that sort of continuation after death, but the ritual comforted her nonetheless. It was around this time that Catherine began to notice small inconsistencies in the story of Andrew's death, tiny details that didn't quite align. Nothing dramatic, nothing that suggested any kind of foul play or conspiracy, just odd little discrepancies that nagged at her. The exact time of his collapse, reported differently in the hospital records and in what his colleague Dr. Patel had told her. The missing personal effects, Andrew's wedding ring and watch that the hospital said had been removed during resuscitation efforts but were never returned to her. The strange call from the hospital's billing department, 6 months after his death, inquiring about prescription refills for a patient named Harris. Catherine dismissed these thoughts initially, attributing them to the natural tendency of a grieving mind to seek patterns, to resist the chaotic randomness of loss. But the inconsistencies persisted, collected in the back of her mind like dust in a corner, impossible to fully ignore. She began, almost against her will, to investigate. Subtle inquiries to former colleagues, careful review of the documents related to Andrew's death, late-night internet searches about aneurysms and survival rates and misidentified bodies. Most of her questions led nowhere, dissolved into perfectly reasonable explanations or the expected administrative errors of a busy hospital. But a few lingered, unanswered. The pathologist who had supposedly conducted Andrew's autopsy had no record of the procedure in his files. The death certificate had been signed by a doctor who, according to hospital records, had been on vacation that week. The life insurance policy Andrew had taken out just 3 months before his death had been processed with unusual speed. The substantial sum deposited in an account Catherine hadn't known existed, then promptly transferred elsewhere. None of it added up to anything concrete, anything Catherine could take to the authorities, or even share with friends without sounding like she was unraveling. But the questions remained, growing louder in the quiet moments of her days, the still hours of her nights. Had there been some mistake, some misconduct? Or was she simply unable to accept the finality of Andrew's death, manufacturing mystery where there was only the mundane tragedy of a life cut short? 7 years after Andrew's death, Catherine's closest friend Megan convinced her to join Facebook. "It's time to reconnect with the world," Megan had urged, setting up the account on Catherine's laptop despite her protests. "You don't have to use it all the time, but it's a good way to keep in touch." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, though she rarely logged in, finding the parade of carefully curated happiness from former classmates and distant acquaintances more depressing than uplifting. But occasionally, usually late at night when sleep eluded her, Catherine would scroll through her feed, looking at photos of children she'd never meet, vacations she'd never take, lives that continued to unfold while hers felt suspended in amber. It was during one of these late-night sessions, nearly 8 years to the day since Andrew's death, that Catherine's life changed for the second time. She had fallen into a rabbit hole of clicks, moving from a former colleague's vacation photos to the page of a resort in Belize the colleague had tagged, then to photos of other guests who had stayed there. It was mindless scrolling, the kind of internet wandering that serves no purpose but to pass sleepless hours. And then, suddenly, Catherine was staring at a ghost. The photo showed a beachside restaurant, tables set out on the sand, tiki torches illuminating a group of tanned, smiling tourists. It had been posted 3 weeks earlier by someone named Maria Alvarez, whom Catherine didn't know. But at one of the tables in the background, his arm around a young woman with long dark hair, sat a man who looked exactly like Andrew. Older, more tanned, hair longer than he had worn it during their marriage, but unmistakably, impossibly, her dead husband. Catherine's first thought was that she had finally lost her mind. The persistent grief, the unanswered questions, the loneliness, they had finally broken something essential in her brain, causing her to hallucinate her husband's face on a stranger in a vacation photo. She closed the laptop, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face. When she returned and reopened the computer, the photo was still there. The man who could not possibly be Andrew was still sitting at that beach table, still smiling at the camera, still very much alive. With shaking hands, Catherine saved the photo, then began to investigate the account that had posted it. Maria Alvarez was a dental hygienist from Miami, according to her profile. Her photos showed a life of weekend trips, cocktails with friends, a small dog she clearly adored. Catherine scoured the images, looking for more glimpses of the Andrew lookalike, but found none. She sent Maria a friend request, then a message explaining that she was trying to identify someone in the background of the beach photo, someone who looked like a relative she had lost touch with. It wasn't entirely a lie. While waiting for a response, Catherine dug deeper, searching for any trace of Andrew or someone who looked like him in connection with Belize, with the resort, with Maria Alvarez. She found nothing, but the photo haunted her. The angle of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, the familiar gesture of his hand on the woman's back. These were not things a stranger would share with Andrew. These were Andrew's own particular physicality, his unique presence in the world that Catherine knew as well as she knew herself. 3 days later, Maria accepted Catherine's friend request and responded to her message. Yes, she remembered the man in the background of that photo. He was a doctor working at the resort's medical center, very friendly, always ready with a recommendation for local restaurants or hidden beaches. His name was Michael Collins, and he had moved to Belize from the US about 7 years ago, though she didn't know exactly where he had lived before. She was happy to put Catherine in touch with him if he was indeed the relative she was looking for. Michael Collins, not Andrew Harris. But the timeline matched perfectly with Andrew's death, and the face in the photo was his beyond any reasonable doubt. Catherine's mind raced with possibilities, a case of extraordinary resemblance, a twin brother Andrew had never mentioned, or the possibility she had barely allowed herself to consider, that Andrew had not died at all, but had somehow faked his death and fled to Belize to become Michael Collins. The thought was simultaneously horrifying and electrifying. If Andrew was alive, it meant that everything Catherine had believed for the past 8 years was a lie. The grief she had carried, the life she had rebuilt around his absence, the identity she had forged as a widow, all of it based on a deception of staggering cruelty. But it also meant that Andrew was out there in the world, breathing, living, within reach. The husband she had mourned was not rotting in the grave she had visited faithfully for 8 years, but sitting on a beach in Belize with his arm around another woman. It was too much to process alone. Catherine called Megan, asked her to come over immediately. When Megan arrived, Catherine showed her the photo, explained her suspicions, watched her friend's face move from confusion to disbelief to cautious consideration. "It does look like him," Megan admitted, studying the image closely. "But, Kath, people have doppelgangers, and grief can make us see what we want to see." "It's not just the resemblance," Catherine insisted. "It's the timing, the inconsistencies in the hospital records, the missing personal effects. And look at the way he's sitting, the way his hand is resting on that woman's back. That's Andrew, Megan. I'd know him anywhere." Megan wasn't entirely convinced, but she agreed the situation warranted further investigation. "But carefully," she warned. "If this is somehow Andrew, and he went to these lengths to disappear, confronting him directly could be dangerous." Catherine knew Megan was right, but the need to know the truth had become all-consuming. She couldn't simply return to her life with this question hanging over her. She responded to Maria, thanking her for the information, saying that Michael did indeed look like her relative, but she wasn't sure it was him. Could Maria tell her more about him? How long had he worked at the resort? Did he have a social media presence of his own? While waiting for Maria's response, Catherine began planning a trip to Belize. She used most of her savings to book a 2-week stay at the resort where Michael Collins worked, reserving a room with a view of the beach and medical center. She told no one of her plans except Megan, who tried to dissuade her but ultimately agreed to check on the house and feed the cat while Catherine was away. The night before her flight, Catherine sat in what had once been Andrew's home office, now a rarely used guest room, and allowed herself to fully confront the implications of what she was doing. If the man in Belize was Andrew, it meant he had chosen to leave her, to let her believe he was dead rather than simply asking for a divorce like a normal person. It meant he had orchestrated an elaborate deception involving multiple people at the hospital who would have had to be complicit in faking his death. It meant he had valued his freedom from their marriage more than he had valued her sanity, her heart, her life. The anger that rose in Catherine then was like nothing she had ever experienced, a white-hot rage that burned through her grief, her confusion, her lingering love for the man she thought she had known. If Andrew was alive, if he had done this to her, Catherine would make him face her. She would look into his eyes and demand an explanation for the 8 years he had stolen from her, the future they might have had, the children they had planned who were never conceived. But beneath the anger was a fragile, desperate hope that she was wrong, that the man in the photo was not Andrew, but some random doctor who happened to look like him, that the inconsistencies in the hospital records were just coincidences or administrative errors, that her beloved husband had indeed died that February day, and his body was where it should be, in the grave she had visited so faithfully, because as painful as Andrew's death had been, the alternative, that he had chosen to inflict this suffering on her, was in some ways even worse. The flight to Belize was long, with a layover in Miami that gave Catherine too much time to second-guess herself. She almost turned around twice, almost called Megan to say she was coming home, that she had been crazy to pursue this wild theory. But each time she looked at the photo of Michael Collins, saved as the background on her phone, she found the resolve to continue. She needed to know, one way or another. The resort was exactly as it had appeared in the photos. White sand beaches, swaying palm trees, turquoise water extending to the horizon. Under different circumstances, it would have been paradise. For Catherine, it was the setting for a confrontation she both dreaded and craved. She checked into her room, unpacked methodically, then walked the grounds, familiarizing herself with the layout, noting the location of the medical center where Michael supposedly worked. It was a small building near the main pool, with a red cross painted on the door and office hours posted beside it. According to the sign, the doctor was available from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily, with emergency services on call 24/7. Catherine checked her watch, 2:30 p.m. The office would be open now. She could walk in, ask to see the doctor, end this mystery immediately. But standing there in the tropical heat, Catherine froze. What would she say? How would she react if the man who walked through the door was indeed Andrew? Would she scream, cry, attack him? And what if it wasn't him? What if she had traveled all this way, spent all this money, reopened all these wounds for nothing but a coincidental resemblance? She retreated to her room, ordered room service, and spent the evening watching the medical center from her balcony. She saw patients come and go, a child with a scraped knee, an elderly man being helped by his wife, a young woman clutching her stomach. But she never saw the doctor himself, just a nurse or assistant who seemed to be handling the minor cases. The next day, Catherine positioned herself at the beach bar with a clear view of the medical center, nursing a single cocktail for hours as she watched the comings and goings. Again she saw the assistant, but not the doctor. She began to wonder if Michael Collins was on vacation, if her timing was catastrophically bad. But just as she was considering approaching the assistant to ask, she saw him. He emerged from the side door of the medical center, wearing khaki shorts and a linen shirt, sunglasses perched on top of his head. Even at a distance, the resemblance to Andrew was uncanny. The same height, the same build, the same way of walking with his head slightly tilted forward. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest, her vision tunneling until all she could see was this man who might be her dead husband moving across the resort grounds toward the beachfront restaurant. Catherine abandoned her drink and followed, staying far enough behind that he wouldn't notice her. He entered the restaurant, greeted the hostess like an old friend, and was led to a table on the patio. Catherine took a seat at the bar, positioned so she could observe him without being obvious. She ordered another drink she had no intention of consuming and watched as he chatted with the server, checked his phone, scanned the beach with the relaxed air of a man at home in his surroundings. It was him. Catherine knew it with absolute certainty now, seeing him in motion rather than in a single still photograph. The way he gestured when he spoke, the habit of running his hand through his hair, the slight asymmetry of his smile. This was Andrew, somehow alive and well, and living as Michael Collins in this tropical paradise while she had spent 8 years mourning him. Catherine felt lightheaded, her breath coming in short gasps. The bartender asked if she was okay, and she nodded mechanically, unable to form words. She was having a panic attack, she realized distantly, her body rebelling against the impossible truth her eyes were reporting. She forced herself to breathe deeply, counting in and out as her therapist had taught her years ago, when grief would overwhelm her in waves. When she had regained some composure, Catherine looked back at Andrew's table. He was still there, now joined by the dark-haired woman from the Facebook photo. They were holding hands across the table, laughing at some shared joke. The picture of a happy couple enjoying a beautiful day. Catherine felt sick. She watched them through their entire meal, cataloguing each familiar gesture of Andrew's, each evidence of intimacy between him and this woman. They shared food from each other's plates, something Andrew had always done with Catherine. He touched the woman's face with a tenderness Catherine remembered well. They left the restaurant with their arms around each other, strolling down the beach until they disappeared from view. Catherine returned to her room and vomited, her body purging the shock and betrayal. Then she sat on the balcony, staring at nothing as the sun set and the resort's nightlife began to pulse below her. Andrew was alive. Andrew had faked his death. Andrew had a new life, a new woman, had left Catherine behind as thoroughly as if she had never existed. But why? Their marriage hadn't been perfect, but it hadn't been a disaster either. There had been no tremendous fight before his death, no signs that Andrew was deeply unhappy or planning to leave. If he had wanted out, why hadn't he simply asked for a divorce? Why this elaborate, cruel deception that had caused Catherine years of unnecessary grief? She needed answers. And now that she knew where to find Andrew, she was determined to get them. The next day, Catherine made an appointment at the medical center, giving a false name and complaining of a persistent headache. The assistant took her information, her fake hotel room number, her fabricated medical history, and told her the doctor would see her shortly. Catherine sat in the small waiting room, heart racing, rehearsing what she would say when she came face to face with her dead husband. But when the door to the examination room opened, it wasn't Andrew who emerged, but a woman in a white coat. Dr. Elena Vasquez, according to her name tag. She apologized for the wait, explaining that Dr. Collins was attending to an emergency at another resort, but would be back tomorrow. Would Catherine like to reschedule, or would she prefer Dr. Vasquez to examine her? Catherine rescheduled for the following morning, then spent the rest of the day and night alternating between rage and something close to relief at the brief reprieve. She barely slept, imagining confrontation scenarios that ranged from Andrew falling to his knees, begging forgiveness, to Andrew having her forcibly removed from the resort as a deranged stalker. By morning, Catherine had settled on a plan. She would not reveal herself immediately. She would go through with the examination, observe Andrew up close, confirm beyond any doubt that it was him. Only then would she confront him with the truth of who she was and what she knew. This time, when the examination room door opened, Andrew walked in. He was tanned, his hair streaked with sun and slightly longer than he had worn it during their marriage, but it was unmistakably him. He wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses, the same type of watch, though not his wedding watch, Catherine noted with a fresh stab of pain. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, glancing at the chart in his hand. "Ms. Johnson, I understand you're having some headache issues." His voice. The voice Catherine had strained to remember in the years since his death, afraid of forgetting its exact timbre and cadence. The voice that had told her he loved her, that had whispered plans for their future, that had supposedly been silenced forever 8 years ago. It washed over her like a physical force, and for a moment, Catherine couldn't speak. "Ms. Johnson?" he prompted, looking up from the chart with a slight frown. Catherine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of recognition. There was none. Just the polite professional concern of a doctor for a new patient. Yes, she managed finally. Headaches for the past few days. Andrew Michael nodded and began asking routine questions. Any history of migraines? Any changes in vision or nausea accompanying the headaches? Any recent head injuries? Catherine answered mechanically, watching his face, his hands, the familiar way he made notes on the chart. He examined her with clinical detachment, checking her pupils, feeling the lymph nodes in her neck, taking her blood pressure. His touch was impersonal, his manner relaxed and confident. He smelled different, some tropical cologne instead of the sandalwood he had favored in their marriage, but underneath was the scent Catherine would have known anywhere, the scent of the man she had slept beside for 12 years. "Well, your vitals are normal," Andrew said finally, stepping back. "It's likely just dehydration and sun exposure, common among visitors. I'm going to recommend lots of water, staying out of the midday sun, and these over-the-counter pain relievers." He scribbled on a prescription pad and handed her the paper. "If the headaches persist or worsen, come back and see me, okay?" Catherine took the prescription, their fingers brushing momentarily. Andrew showed no reaction, no flash of recognition, nothing to indicate he was looking at the wife he had abandoned to a life of grief and confusion. "Dr. Collins," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt, "have you worked here long?" He smiled pleasantly. "About 7 years now. Best decision I ever made, leaving the rat race back in the States for this." He gestured vaguely toward the window and the paradise beyond. "Where were you before?" Catherine pressed, watching him carefully. If Andrew felt any discomfort at the question, he didn't show it. "Chicago," he said smoothly. "Big hospital there. Good work, but stressful, you know. Life's too short." A lie. They had never lived in Chicago. Andrew had done his residency in Boston and had worked at Memorial Hospital in their hometown ever since. He was lying effortlessly, maintaining this false identity without a hint of hesitation. "I've heard Chicago winters are brutal," Catherine said, testing him further. Andrew laughed. "The worst. Don't miss those at all." Another lie, flowing as naturally as the truth. Catherine wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he admitted who he was, who she was, what he had done to her. But she contained herself, smiling tightly and thanking him for his time. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Actually, I think I recognize you," she said, looking back at him. "Were you ever in Connecticut? Memorial Hospital?" For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Andrew's eyes. Alarm, recognition, guilt. Catherine couldn't be sure, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by an apologetic smile. "No, never been to Connecticut, I'm afraid. Must be thinking of someone else." Catherine nodded, as though accepting this answer, and left the examination room. Her hands were shaking so badly she could hardly open the door to exit the medical center. Outside in the bright Belizean sunshine, she gasped for air like someone who had been underwater too long. It was him. It was Andrew, and he had looked her in the eye and lied without hesitation. Catherine spent the rest of the day following Andrew from a distance, watching as he completed his shift at the medical center, then joined the dark-haired woman, his new wife, girlfriend, for dinner at one of the resort's restaurants. They seemed happy, comfortable with each other, affectionate in the way of a couple who had been together for some time. The woman was younger than Catherine, probably in her early 30s, beautiful in a natural way that made Catherine suddenly, painfully conscious of the lines grief had etched around her eyes, the grey that had begun to streak her once auburn hair. As the evening progressed, Catherine's shock and confusion crystallized into a cold, hard anger. Andrew had stolen 8 years of her life. He had left her to grieve, to struggle through depression and loneliness, to build a life alone while he basked in the sun with a younger woman. He had lied to her face just hours ago, maintaining the fiction that he had never been Andrew Harris, never been her husband, never broken her heart in the most profound way possible. Catherine returned to her room and searched online for information about faking death, about the legal implications for those who did it and those who helped. She learned that besides the obvious fraud charges, Andrew could be prosecuted for the insurance money, for falsifying government documents, potentially even for conspiracy if others had helped him. She thought of the colleagues at the hospital who must have been involved, the life insurance company that had paid out, the friends who had comforted her while perhaps knowing the truth. By morning, Catherine had made a decision. She would confront Andrew privately, demand an explanation, and then determine what to do based on his response. She would not involve the authorities immediately, would not make a public scene, would give him one chance to explain himself before she tore his carefully constructed new life apart. She waited outside his bungalow, a private residence on the resort grounds that she had identified the previous day by following him home. The dark-haired woman had left earlier, dressed in professional clothing and carrying a laptop bag, off to work somewhere nearby, Catherine presumed. Andrew would be leaving for his shift at the medical center soon. She would intercept him on the path, insist on a conversation away from prying eyes. When Andrew emerged from the bungalow, he was dressed in the casual doctor's uniform of the resort, khaki pants and a polo shirt with the medical center's logo. He was checking his phone, not looking where he was going, and nearly walked directly into Catherine, who had stepped onto the path in front of him. "Excuse me," he said automatically, starting to move around her. Then he looked up and saw her face. This time, there was no mistaking his reaction. Andrew froze, the color draining from his face, his eyes widening in shock and unmistakable recognition. He knew exactly who Catherine was. "Hello, Andrew," Catherine said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Or should I call you Michael now?" Andrew's eyes darted around as if looking for escape routes, but they were alone on the path, sheltered from view by flowering bushes. "Catherine," he said finally, her name an admission of everything he had denied the day before. "How did you find you?" Catherine finished for him. "Facebook. Ironic, isn't it? The modern world makes it hard to stay dead." Andrew swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in a way that was achingly familiar to Catherine. "We should talk," he said quietly. "But not here, not now. I have patience." "Patience can wait," Catherine cut him off. "I've waited 8 years. 8 years thinking you were dead, Andrew. 8 years grieving for you. You owe me an explanation, and you're going to give it to me now." Something shifted in Andrew's expression, the shock receding, replaced by a wariness, a calculation that Catherine had never seen on his face during their marriage. "Fine," he said after a moment, "but not on the path. My place." He gestured to the bungalow behind him. Catherine hesitated. She had not anticipated being invited into the home Andrew shared with his new partner, but she needed answers, more than she needed to protect herself from further pain. She nodded and followed him back to the bungalow. Inside it was airy and bright, decorated in blues and whites that echoed the sea visible through the windows. Photos on the walls showed Andrew and the dark-haired woman in various tropical locations, on boats, on beaches, smiling with the easy happiness of people without ghosts. Catherine looked away from them, focusing instead on Andrew, who stood awkwardly in the center of the living room, as though unsure how to behave in his own home with his supposedly dead wife present. "Why?" Catherine asked simply. It was the only question that mattered. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that had confirmed his identity to Catherine at the restaurant. "It's complicated," he began. "Uncomplicate it," Catherine snapped. Andrew sighed, gesturing for Catherine to sit. She remained standing, and after a moment he did too, maintaining the distance between them. "I was unhappy," he said finally, "for a long time. Years before I left. You didn't leave, Andrew. You died. Or at least that's what you wanted everyone to believe. That's what you wanted me to believe." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I know what I did was extreme. Cruel, even. But I couldn't see another way out." "Another way out of what?" Catherine demanded. "Our marriage. Normal people get divorced, Andrew. They don't fake their own deaths and disappear to Belize." "It wasn't just the marriage," Andrew said, his words coming faster now. "It was everything. The job, the house in the suburbs, the expectations, everyone's expectations. My parents, your parents, our friends, the hospital board. Everyone had this image of Dr. Andrew Harris, this perfect life I was supposed to lead. And I was suffocating in it." Catherine stared at him, disbelieving. "So you faked your death because you were having a midlife crisis, because you were bored with our suburban life? That's your explanation for letting me think you were dead for 8 years?" Andrew paced to the window and back. "I knew you wouldn't understand." "You're right. I don't understand," Catherine said, her voice rising. "I don't understand how the man I loved, the man I thought loved me, could be so monumentally selfish, so unbelievably cruel." "I did love you," Andrew said quietly, "but not enough. Not enough to stay in that life, and I knew if I just asked for a divorce, you would fight for our marriage. You would insist on counseling, on trying to fix things. Your whole identity was wrapped up in being Mrs. Dr. Harris in that life we had built. You wouldn't have let go easily, and I needed a clean break, a complete escape. The casual cruelty of his assessment knocked the breath from Catherine's lungs. My whole identity. I had a career, Andrew, friends, interests outside our marriage, but I also loved you, yes. I wanted a future with you, and you threw that away because you were bored. Because you wanted to play doctor in paradise instead of honoring your commitments. Andrew's face hardened. See? This is exactly why I couldn't just leave normally. The judgment, the guilt. I would never have been free. Free? Catherine echoed incredulously. You chose your freedom over my sanity, over 8 years of my life. Do you have any idea what you did to me? I thought you were dead, Andrew. Dead. I identified a body I thought was yours. I buried what I thought were your remains. I grieved for you until I thought the pain would kill me. I'm sorry for your pain, Andrew said, and Catherine could hear the rehearsed quality in his voice, as though he had anticipated this confrontation and prepared for it. But I'm not sorry for choosing my own happiness. Catherine looked around the bungalow, taking in the evidence of Andrew's new life, a life he had built on the foundation of her suffering. How did you do it? The body, the death certificate, the insurance? Andrew hesitated, then sighed. Does it matter now? It matters to me, Catherine insisted. I want to know exactly how you orchestrated this fraud. Andrew perched on the arm of a chair, his posture defeated. I had help. A colleague at the hospital, Richardson, you remember him? He had gambling debts, needed money. He helped fake the medical records, the death certificate. The body was a John Doe from the morgue, similar build to me. The morgue attendant was Richardson's cousin. The insurance was complicated. Offshore accounts, identity changes. I won't bore you with the details. Bore me, Catherine said coldly, but Andrew shook his head. The less you know about that, the better, for your own legal protection. My legal protection? Catherine laughed without humor. How considerate of you after everything else. Catherine, Andrew said, leaning forward, what do you want from me now? Why are you here? Revenge? Money? To drag me back to face charges? The question caught Catherine off guard. What did she want? She had been so focused on confirming Andrew was alive, on confronting him, that she hadn't fully considered what would come after. I want, she began, then stopped. What did she want? The last 8 years back? The husband she had thought she had? That was impossible. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me if any of it was real. Our marriage, your love for me. Was it all a lie? Andrew's expression softened slightly. No, not all of it. I did love you, Catherine. In my way. And there were good times, genuine happiness, but people change. I changed. I wanted different things. And her. Catherine nodded toward a photo of Andrew with the dark-haired woman. Does she know about me? About who you really are? Alicia knows I was married before, Andrew said carefully. She knows I left my previous life behind. The details. She doesn't need those. So she thinks you're divorced, Catherine concluded. Not that you're a fraud who faked his own death and is still legally married to a woman who spent 8 years grieving for you. Andrew winced. Put like that, it sounds exactly like what it is, Catherine interrupted. A fantasy built on lies. They stared at each other in silence for a long moment. These two people who had once shared everything, now separated by years and lies and different versions of the same events. What now? Andrew asked finally. Are you going to turn me in? Destroy this life I've built? It was the question Catherine had been asking herself since she had confirmed Andrew was alive. What did justice look like in this situation? What did she want the outcome to be? I don't know, she answered honestly. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need time to think. Andrew nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Catherine, before you decide, consider this. Exposing me won't undo your pain. It won't give you back those years. All it will do is create more pain. For Alicia, who is innocent in all this, for my colleagues here, for everyone in my new life. The calculated appeal to her compassion enraged Catherine anew. Don't you dare try to manipulate me, she hissed. Don't you dare use my capacity for empathy, which you so clearly lack, against me. You forfeited any right to ask anything of me the moment you let me believe you were dead. Andrew raised his hands in surrender. You're right. I'm sorry. But Catherine could see he wasn't sorry for what he had done. Only sorry that he had been caught. that his carefully constructed new identity was now threatened. "I'm going back to my room," Catherine said, moving toward the door. "I need to think. Don't try to run, Andrew. I have evidence now. Photos, recordings. If you disappear again, I'll go straight to the authorities with everything." It was a bluff. She had no recordings. But Andrew didn't know that. He nodded, his expression grim. "I'll be at the medical center all day. Find me when you've decided." Catherine left the bungalow, walking blindly back toward the main resort, her mind churning. The confrontation had gone both better and worse than she had imagined. Better because she had remained relatively composed, had asked the questions she needed to ask. Worse because Andrew's answers had revealed a man she didn't recognize, a cold, calculating person capable of unimaginable cruelty, so different from the man she thought she had married. Back in her room, Catherine called Megan, waking her in the middle of the night back home. Through tears, she recounted the confrontation, the confirmation of Andrew's betrayal, his unapologetic stance. "What should I do, Megan?" she asked when she had finished the story. "Turn him in? Walk away? I don't even know what I want anymore." Megan was silent for a long moment. "Only you can decide that, Kath," she said finally. "But ask yourself this. What outcome will help you move forward? Not what will hurt Andrew most, or what he deserves, but what will free you from this limbo you've been in for 8 years. Catherine pondered this as they talked, and for hours after they hung up. What would free her? Seeing Andrew arrested, his new life destroyed? The public vindication of everyone knowing he had abandoned her, not died? Or simply knowing the truth herself and finding a way to move on with that knowledge? The next day, Catherine did not go to the medical center as she had told Andrew she would. Instead, she explored the small town beyond the resort, walking through markets and along the shoreline, trying to clear her head. She thought about what she had learned, about the years she had lost, about the lies Andrew had told and continued to tell. By evening, she had reached a decision. She returned to the resort and waited outside the medical center until Andrew's shift ended. When he emerged, he looked unsurprised to see her, though his expression was wary. "Let's walk," Catherine suggested, gesturing toward the beach. They strolled in silence until they reached a relatively secluded stretch of sand, the resort lights twinkling in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and golds that reflected on the water. "I've made my decision," Catherine said, stopping to face Andrew. He braced himself visibly. "And? I'm not going to turn you in," Catherine said quietly. "Not to the police, not to the insurance company, not to Alicia." Relief washed over Andrew's face, followed quickly by suspicion. "Why not? What do you want in exchange?" Catherine looked at him. This man she had loved, had built dreams with, had grieved for. She felt the weight of the past 8 years, the grief, the questions, the slow rebuilding of her life. And she felt something else too, a surprising lightness, as though naming the truth had released a burden she hadn't fully recognized she was carrying. "I want nothing from you, Andrew," she said. "Nothing except this. Acknowledge what you did. Say the words. Tell me you faked your death, that you let me believe you were gone forever, that you chose your freedom over my well-being." Andrew hesitated, then nodded. "I faked my death," he said, his voice low. "I let you believe I was gone forever. I chose my freedom over your well-being. I'm sorry for your pain, Catherine. Truly. But I can't say I'm sorry for the choice itself." Catherine absorbed his words, feeling them settle into the spaces where questions had lived for so long. It wasn't the apology she might have wanted, but it was the truth, finally. "Goodbye, Andrew," she said, turning to walk away. "That's it," he called after her, sounding confused. "You came all this way just for that?" Catherine paused, looking back at him over her shoulder. "I came for answers. I got them. Now I can move on with my life, my real life, not the half-life I've been living in your shadow." "And you won't expose me?" Andrew pressed, still disbelieving. "No," Catherine said. "Not because you deserve that mercy, but because I deserve peace. And this, knowing the truth, seeing who you really are, this gives me peace in a way that revenge never could." She left him standing on the beach, walked back to the resort without looking back. In her room, Catherine opened her laptop and booked a flight home for the following day. Then she took out her phone and deleted the photo of Michael Collins that had led her here. She didn't need it anymore. That night, Catherine slept more soundly than she had in 8 years, without dreams of Andrew, without waking to reach for someone who wasn't there. In the morning, She packed her belongings and checked out of the resort, declining the front desk's offer to call a doctor when they noticed her red-rimmed eyes. "I'm fine," she told them, and realized with some surprise that she was not healed, not whole, but on her way there. Knowing the truth, however painful, was better than living with a ghost. On the flight home, Catherine began composing a letter in her mind, not to Andrew, who had forfeited any claim to her words, but to herself. A letter acknowledging the pain of the past 8 years, the grief that had been real even if its cause had been false, the strength she had found in rebuilding her life alone. A letter promising that what came next would be lived fully and truly, without the shadow of Andrew's supposed death hanging over her. When the plane landed, Megan was waiting at the airport, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. Catherine hugged her friend tightly, then pulled back to meet her questioning gaze. "Are you okay?" Megan asked. What happened with Andrew?" Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the truth settle in her bones. "Andrew is dead," she said finally. "Not in the way I thought for 8 years, but dead to me all the same, and I'm ready to live again." Megan linked her arm through Catherine's as they walked toward the exit, toward the future that waited beyond. "It was too late for him," she said quietly. Catherine nodded, remembering the man on the beach, the stranger wearing her husband's face, the life he had chosen over the one they had shared. "Yes," she agreed. "It was too late." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded Catherine of Belize, of endings and revelations and painful truths. But there was beauty there too, and the promise of a new day to follow. Catherine lifted her face to catch the last rays, feeling something long knotted inside her begin, slowly, to unravel. It was time to go home. Not to the shrine of memories she had maintained for a man who hadn't deserved them, but to the future she would build for herself, honest, open-eyed, and free. Have you ever wondered if the tragedies we accept might be disguising someone's deliberate choice to vanish? If the person you grieved for years might have orchestrated their own disappearance, leaving you behind to suffer while they started fresh? What would you do if you discovered such a devastating truth? Would you seek justice, or would you finally set yourself free? Subscribe to hear more stories of hidden escapes and delayed revelations that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you.